This book made me think about my own life.
Charlie comes from a pretty personal place for me. You know, this is a story that's set in the town where I grew up, in North Idaho. And, you know, for a time in my life, I had a very complicated experience in a religious school. As a gay kid in the 90s, I was wrestling with my faith, and it presented itself in depression, and eventually I started to self-medicate with food. With the love and support of people around me, I was able to find an off-ramp, but I also knew that not everybody has that. And so I wanted to tell the story of somebody who didn't have that off-ramp.
I saw The Whale in its first run at the Playwrights Horizon in a very small theater, about 125 seats, and was deeply moved. It was about characters that on the surface were incredibly different from me, but as soon as I entered the play and got into the minds of these characters, I actually found a lot of myself there. And immediately afterwards, I knew it was something that I wanted to be involved with and to see if I could breathe cinema into it. It was just a beautiful process watching it come to life. It was so clear that this story was very personal to Sam Hunter and that he just had to be completely in control of all the words. And so very early on, I assured him that he was going to adapt it.
I know that the traditional way to adapt a play into a screenplay is to, you know, open it up and add locations, probably add characters. And I was nervous about that because I wasn't sure that that's what the story wanted. But I think it was either our second or third conversation, Darren said, no, let's keep it in the apartment. I knew it was the right choice. I knew it was the difficult choice. We had 10 years to work on it together. And the spine of the story is pretty much exactly what the play is, but the journey for me as a screenwriter was to figure out what the visual vocabulary of this story was. I think Darren had an incredible amount of trust in me and my script, and he had an incredible amount of trust in Brendan.
A big reason I never made this film is for 10 years was because I couldn't cast it. I went through many different actors and nothing ever really clicked. And then I stumbled on a trailer of this low-budget Brazilian movie. Brendan had a small part in it, and immediately a light bulb went off.
I was told that Darren was going to make a movie. And he was interested in meeting me, so we sat down in his office one frozen January, and he told me about the film he had designs to make.
To be completely clear, I really didn't know that much of his work. I still haven't seen George of the Jungle or Encino Man, but it was the first actor that I felt something inside that, okay, this is material, meeting the right artist.
It had everything and a role that I was looking for. It was unique. There was something about Charlie to me that seemed heroic in his quest for redemption. He struck me as the kind of character who is his own worst enemy, but at the same time he can see the good in others and bring them out. You don't have to be angry at the whole world. You can just be angry at me. He's a complex character, the substance of which I knew that Darren would handle with honesty and empathy and tell a story that asks us to not look away. I was absolutely hooked, and I wanted in. Think about the truth of your argument. I know this may sound silly, but it's important. Promise. It's important. Charlie lives alone in a 2-bedroom apartment somewhere in Idaho. He's an English teacher who instructs students online using a webcam, and he likes to keep it turned off, not wanting to distract them by how they might judge him for how he appears. His emotional world is, for all of that sadness that he carries is an intensely optimistic one at the same time, because he sees in his students their capacity to be the best that they can. Charlie can see the good in others, but he can't see it in himself, sadly.
It was just so evident from the first moment that Brendan knew exactly who this guy was. If an actor approached this role with any amount of cynicism or frustration, it would really not work. And Brendan, from the moment one, had that bright light, that humanity and that faith. Even in the darkest moments, you still see the big-hearted human being at the center of it.
Charlie is the most emotionally demanding character I've ever seen on paper. To play him, I knew would take everything I've got.
That was very clear the first time we met, that he wanted a challenge. And to me, that's one of the most exciting things.
The author was just trying to save us from his own sad story.
Charlie's home base is his couch, and so it's a world in a small world, but it was a set that astonishingly could be shot to give a whole emotional reality. Charlie's a man of letters, and the walls are lined with his books, and each book was curated to be definitely something that Charlie would have read or would have taught or owned.
Darren doesn't miss anything. And I think, especially with a movie like this, which is so contained, that detail is so necessary.
One of the things that attracted me to it was how confined it was, because I believe that when you have restrictions and you have boundaries, that's where you can start to stylize things and make things your own. So this was really an exercise, reducing everything to the real basic form of cinema, which is performance, light, and camera, to make it all about drama, and figuring out how to move the actors around the room, and then figuring out how the camera could sort of dance with them. You have one character who barely moves, so how to make that interesting? And kind of the big breakthrough that my designers came up with was not putting a couch against a wall. I mean, how often do you walk into a small apartment and see a couch in the middle of the room and it feels natural? And that allowed us to do just a lot of work with the blocking.
Filming in that apartment, what was fun for me and Darren to kind of figure out was how we can use the space and make every scene a little bit different. One thing that we really liked was how she kind of circles Charlie and goes to places where he can't necessarily look back and see her. And she's kind of taunting him in this way. So it's kind of like she's this like demonic voice in his head.
You'd be disgusting even if you weren't this fat. You'd still be that piece of shit dad who walked out on me when I was 8. All because he wanted to fuck one of his students. Can I have one of these?
Yeah. Charlie had choices he's made in his life that he hopes to be able to rectify, but he can't until he confronts some pretty serious truths, namely his estranged relationship with his daughter, Ellie, who he hurt deeply when he left his marriage to her mother for another relationship when she was only 8 years old, and it clearly it harmed her.
Ellie's this incredibly beautifully written character by Sam that is really complicated. Sam and myself constantly had conversations about the true core nature of her. We had many debates if she was evil or she was not evil, and I think the film is ambiguous about it.
Charlie, she's evil.
She's not evil.
I think you see a lot of self-destructive coping mechanisms in this film, and hers that she's chosen is just rage and violence and, you know, sometimes like maniacal behavior.
Does this mean I'm gonna get fat?
Ellie is very easy to despise. So my earliest conversations with Darren, we would just kind of play around a bit and find a balance between the empathetic sides of her, but also the slightly evil sides of her too.
I can't really.
Shut up! Come over here.
The biggest thing that we discussed early on was thinking about like how she became the person that you see in the film. When Charlie left, I think it took a lot out of her mother. And, she has a drinking problem, and I think that really just escalated over time. And Ellie just felt more and more abandoned every day. So I think that rage started as an act of rebellion. And then I think it became this armor that she's built for herself to give her a sense of control.
I know you didn't mean to hurt me.
Okay,
I know that
you know what?
didn't.
Listen to me. Listen. I don't care about you. Get that through your fucking skull.
The one scene where Ellie kind of explodes at Charlie for the first time, when we were rehearsing it, it was never really that emotional. It was more just angry. And I think on the day, emotion just kind of like naturally spilled out. That was the first moment where I made a connection with her. Tapping into that empathy just like really, really hit. And I felt her pain.
Just fucking die already. Enough.
Sadie is able to bring so many different contradictory colors to every line. I'll still watch the film after seeing it hundreds of times and see new subtle things that Sadie is doing, and I'm just like, wow.
And action.
Each film has its own theme, and then because of the theme, you develop a visual language and tell it in its own way. So I try to be open to receiving what the themes are and then try to do something that's very unique for each project. So this one's different than the rest. The camera moves differently. I knew I wanted to go back to working with a dolly and a more classical form of camera for this. This was much more about how to make this as cinematic as possible.
It was the scene where I first meet Charlie, and they had this dolly shot going around the room, and it took us so many takes to get because everything needed to be timed perfectly. It's so impressive how they filmed the entire thing. We only had this one small room, and Darren was able to make 2 or 3 characters in the room at once and just feel very genuine and alive.
That's it.
Darren is very specific with his vision of the entire film, and I talked to him a lot about the character.
I'm sorry, but who are you?
Are you acquainted with the gospel of Jesus Christ?
What?
I'm sharing Christ's message of love, and I'm showing people.
Thomas is a missionary who arrives under fairly mysterious circumstances, and we don't know exactly who this kid is. He's bringing the good word door to door, but there's something else to him.
Thomas, he's a lost soul. He's trying to find his way through the world.
Thomas, tell me the truth. You find me disgusting.
No. I just want to help.
Thomas needs to find out what he believes in when he was able to meet Charlie. He really saw an opportunity to save someone, but in a way, he's really doing it for himself.
Thomas has been kind of living in a closed society in this church obsessed with the end times and the rapture. And Thomas's problem is that he looks around and he sees all of these people for whom this worldview works perfectly. You know, it was something that I really experienced when I was going to a religious school, that I felt like the dogma was almost like this comfy sweater, and it was a sweater that just never fit me correctly. And I think Thomas is the same way.
You're young. Why the hell would you want to believe that the world is about to end?
I believe that when Christ returns, it's going to be beautiful.
So his quest is to prove his faith to himself. It's a very complicated role. Unlike the 4 other characters, he's kind of the outsider. And he also brings with him a really big secret.
I gotta go.
Who were you really?
Thomas has that big switch halfway through the movie where you start to uncover a lot of his secrets. And the hardest thing was really playing what the audience has to think, and then also playing what Thomas knows to be true about himself.
Thomas was a very difficult character to cast because there's an innocence to him, but he's also a liar. And finding that combination in an actor that could play both of those things at the same time is really a tricky path.
I grew up in a religious household, and me and Thomas had very similar struggles, I guess you could say, just with church and religion itself.
We talked a lot about our mutual experiences with Christianity and our complicated experiences with Christianity, and I think he brings a lot of himself to Thomas.
I was able to talk to Sam a lot about the character and kind of dive deeper into him through his eyes, and then I was able to bring stuff in through my eyes, and we were able to collaborate and make something special.
He's dying. He's refusing to go to the hospital. What he needs is spiritual guidance.
And you're gonna give him that?
No. God will.
I see.
Liz is Charlie's best friend, his caregiver, his enabler sometimes, his conflicted confidant.
Liz was adopted into this religious Christian family, and Alan was her brother. And Alan was the love of Charlie's life. And once he passed, I think the two of them really leaned on each other and grieved his loss. Charlie's way of dealing with that is through food. And I think it's a sign of deep commitment and deep love that she's able to be there for him.
It's an incredibly complicated relationship between Liz and Charlie, and Hong really saw every level of it.
I just hate the thought of you being sealed up in this place when I'm not here. She's definitely still struggling with Alan's death. Liz was adopted, and so, you know, all of the things that entails growing up as an Asian person in Idaho in a very conservative religious family probably is difficult, you know.
Liz is very angry at Thomas for trying to convert Charlie. And you're not really sure why until the confrontation scene between me and Liz.
Dad kicked him out of the church. A couple weeks later, this guy is out jogging on a bike path near the river in Lewiston, sees something washed up on shore, and that was Alan. The love of Charlie's life and my brother.
Oh.
Yeah, oh.
She sees all of these contradictions and all of the hurtful things that have come from his belief system, and that it is something, a revelation for him.
Charlie doesn't have any money.
She doesn't know?
Mary.
Where do you think all the money from his teaching has been going? Over 100,000 at least, right?
That's not true, is it? I think the most devastating moment in the movie for Liz is when she realizes that Charlie's been keeping this big secret from her. And it makes her reassess who she is to him. And it says so much about Liz that she comes back to him after this deep betrayal, because she realizes, I still love him, so I'm here.
Hong brings that toughness, but also that pain and that heart to the role.
That's really what you want as an actor. You know, you want to play characters that sort of do everything, that go from being caustic and angry to being completely heartbroken and weeping. You know, you rarely get that in a single character in a movie.
Action.
You have to go to the hospital.
I think Darren just let me run with it and try different takes, try different line readings and things like that with each take.
Do you still want to hear about Christ's message of love?
No! He does not!
Each take, she does something different, and they all work. It's like a diamond with all the different facets and sparkles and all the different ways you can look at it, and it's always beautiful. So the biggest challenge with Hong is it's just a wealth of material you take back to the edit room.
And cut. Great. Check the gate.
Cutting.
Check.
Checking the gate.
Once we figured out that the camera was going to be this very, very kind of poetic tool, we started to think about light. And then we really worked out a progression of intertwining light with the weather, which was a major character in the film.
Matthew Libatique, our cinematographer, would inform the scenes with weather systems outside the windows.
We kind of had these chapter heads of the 5 days, and Maddie and I spent a lot of time kind of figuring out how the weather moved and how the light moved to try to make each time you were in the space a little bit new and a little bit different.
It was raining outside when there was a particularly stormy scene going on. And as the film progresses, it takes a journey to light.
In the amazing book Moby Dick by the author Herman Melville, the author recounts his story of being at sea.
This film
The first part of his book
is really about seeking truth And that's what Ellie's Moby Dick essay is about also. The essay is written with the innocence of a child. It's funny because of its absolute honesty. It's the epitome of everything that he implores his own students to give him, which is just to write something honest.
I know what this is.
I knew you would.
I wrote this.
You never forget anything.
This Moby Dick essay is something that Ellie wrote in the 8th grade. And I think it shows Charlie that she is a person that's capable of caring and empathizing with people.
It's the best essay I've ever read.
Why are you fucking with me like this?
I'm not.
Ellie pushes it away because it kind of breaks down this wall that she's built for herself. And that's the only thing that's keeping her from like tapping into this pain that she doesn't want to deal with.
Ellie!
No, okay. I can't be here right now.
You're perfect! You'll be happy.
With every scene, a layer is shed. So it's this constant back and forth until, the very end. That moment at the beach gives you a glimpse as to what life was like before. And I think, they were really connected.
For all of that intensity and intelligence and brinksmanship that she brings, you can still see a beautiful little redhead girl underneath it who Charlie absolutely feels that he was out of his senses to have abandoned at such an early age. And the emotional climax that they reach is really the purpose of the whole film.
Charlie can see, through that anger, he can see the intelligence, he can see the love, and he refuses to let go of it until the very end. And I don't think it's until the very end that Ellie sees that in herself.
This book made me think about my own life. And then it made me feel glad for mine.
This film does have a sense of hope. The hope is that in his absence, his daughter will always know that he did regret his life's choices, but he did confront them with honesty.
I think at the heart of this story is a man's unwavering belief that human beings are worth saving. I think at the heart of it is a faith in the goodness of human beings. It's hard to have faith, but it's worth it.
The rough cut is when you first put the film together. It's usually an awful day, probably the most depressing day as a director you ever have. You're usually miserable afterwards, even though you know it's going to be miserable. After watching The Whale's rough cut, I was actually very relieved, because the main challenge of the piece was how to forget that you were in one room and to really be inside the characters' heads. And I think Sam's writing and Brendan's and Sadie's and Hong's and Sam and Ty's performances, you're transported into these 5 different characters and you're swept up and taking into consideration someone else's life situation, their problems, their hopes, their dreams.
Do you ever get the feeling that people are incapable of not caring?
When Darren sent me the film, there was no score, so it was a chance for me to really try to be impacted by the film itself without any notions of what the score should be or could be. I was totally devastated by it. Brendan is funny and bright and light, as well as really able to transmit deep pain and deep emotion, and it really is the thing that allows you into the film. I started giving some musical propositions to Darren. The initial ideas that came to me were to kind of draw upon the nautical theme in the film.
And the amazing book Moby Dick by the author Herman Melville. The author recounts his story of being at sea.
Which is in the sound design, it's in the costumes, it's in the set design, it's in the cinematography. There's a sense that you're at sea. And so for me, a big part of the score was speaking to how emotions can have depth like the sea. Sometimes you feel that you're on top, being rolled around on the waves. And sometimes you feel underwater and submerged in your own emotions. This image that I had of things kind of appearing underwater and then disappearing was a good touchstone for me as I was working. And so a lot of the musical gestures tend to come from nothing and bloom and then disappear and have space. And there's a lot of rolling movements. And then sometimes the storm is there, and there's an emotional spike that we're striking with the music as well, and we're very bold.
I need to know that I have done one thing right with my life.
I don't know that I got instant feedback about like, yes, this is exactly the right thing, or no, this is not the right thing. So he just encouraged me to keep going. Charlie, the main character, he struggles with his breathing throughout the film. So anything that had a sense of air to it. So the pump organ is air pumping through it, and brass obviously is a breath instrument. And as well, I used a overtone flute. Winnie Clement makes and plays all sorts of overtone flutes. He's in Belgium, and when I saw the whale, I thought, this is the perfect sound. And I asked him to build the biggest flute that he's ever built. So he built one that was 21 feet long and played these very low sounds. It sounds like a cross between maybe a didgeridoo and a flute. And to me, it just sounds almost like a musical blowhole, like you would hear from a whale. So that's a foundational tone and texture in the score that I then ran through some tape machines and digitally slowed down and pitched. Very much woven in with the strings and with the brass and the organ elements. There's a binge scene where you really see him in the throes of an emotional moment, and eating is his coping strategy for dealing with emotions. There was a breathing rhythm that Winna played on the overtone flute that has this kind of chug-a-chug sound to it. It sounds a bit like a train going. That kicks up at the beginning of the binge, and I think that signals that it's this unstoppable act of behavior that is out of control. And there's not that much rhythm in the score up to that point, so when that rhythm starts, I think it feels like a moment. The brass is kicking in and everything is swelling. It's a hard moment, and we knew that we were really gonna need to go there because Charlie's going there, so the score really needs to go there. That really is a culmination of almost everything that you've heard in the score up to that point. It's the full force of the orchestra playing in unison and growing to a certain intense moment. I wanted to use the London Contemporary Orchestra, which is a younger group of orchestral musicians in London, and they have really trained themselves to play with a lot of restraint, and they've developed a bit of their own musical vernacular and certain techniques that they've really dialed in a beautiful way. The way that they can hold on to a single note and create really subtle variations is unparalleled. And the sound around them, I knew I wanted to be reverberant, similar to the way it feels underwater. So Air Studios in London is an old church. In the main hall, there's a beautiful reverb bloom there. So these kind of very subtle string blooms with enough air around them, and everything, for the most part, has a bit of distance to it, so that you're feeling a bit of what it sounds like when you're in a concert hall, and you have a bit of distance from the players, and you're hearing these sounds that are softened by the air, the way that you would even underwater as well. It wasn't until I had scored some big scenes that I think Darren felt like, okay, yeah, this is good and this is the right direction. And I asked him about it and he said, well, I just wanted to see what your proposition was. So unlike, hey, we take a little baby step and then yes or no or these things, there's a lot of trust from Darren. There was a lot of trust in the artistic process, which I loved so much.
These assignments don't matter. This course doesn't matter. College doesn't matter. These amazing, honest things that you wrote, they matter.